ஐநா மனித உரிமை கவுன்சிலின் 30வது கூட்டம் தற்போது ஜெனீவா நகரில் நடைபெற்றுக் கொண்டிருக்கிறது. அந்த கூட்டத்திலே ஐநா மனித உரிமை ஆணையர் அல் ஹுசைன் அவர்கள் இலங்கையில் நடைபெற்ற போர்க்குற்றம் தொடர்பான தனது விசாரணை அறிக்கையை சமீபத்தில் சில தினங்களுக்கு முன்னதாக தாக்கல் செய்திருக்கிறார். நம்மோடு பேசுவதற்காக ஐநா மனித உரிமை ஆணையத்தின் முன்னாள் தலைவர் நவநீதம் பிள்ளை அவர்கள் தென்னாப்பிரிக்காவின் டர்பன் நகரில் இருந்து தொடர்பில் இருக்கிறார். அவருடன் பேசலாம். மேம் வணக்கம்.
வணக்கம்.
மேம், the present UN Human Rights Commissioner's report on Sri Lanka is being discussed in the UN General Assembly, UN Human Rights Council meeting. How do you see the report?
Let me first refer to the background on how difficult it was inside the United Nations to have a proper discussion and in the forums, the high forums, Security Council, General Assembly and Human Rights Council. So it took a lot of effort and of course pressure from civil society all over the world that we now have in the next few days this report of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. The resolution of the Human Rights Council was to ask the High Commissioner to investigate this. So it's a long road. It's very important that this report be discussed. And I personally know this after my visit to Sri Lanka.
Ma'am, when you visited Sri Lanka, when you were a Human Rights Commissioner, UN Human Rights Commissioner, have you faced any difficulties from the authorities or restrictions?
Well, firstly, I was invited by the former government of Sri Lanka, so I was their guest. And of course, one of the ministers said very insulting things, like he will marry me to keep me silent. And I objected to that. I'm a guest of the government. I complained to former President Rajapaksa about that. And he apologized. So that was just the one incident. Otherwise, I was very well received and I and my team could go where we wished to. We met with people. I found it a very moving experience, particularly in the north. But I found that actually everybody has suffered. It's true, the Tamils suffered the most with as the report indicates, thousands of people have been killed. But I spoke to everyone. I spoke to Sinhalese, I spoke to Muslims, and while they were relieved that the conflict has ended, they were extremely troubled about the violations of human rights there.
What is the status of those people now?
The report that is under discussion now firstly indicates the widespread and systematic killing, mainly of Tamils. I don't know whether they put a figure on it, but previous UN panel put a figure of 40,000, mainly Tamils killed. The report gives you ideas of the shelling by the security forces of the former government, the shelling of people. Now that's a violation of international law, because you cannot have indiscriminate killing of people. It's an international obligation to protect civilians who are not part of the combat. And of course, what shocked me is the investigation revealed the extent of the sexual violence committed against women and girls. And even more troubling is recent incidents of disappearances and this white man going around picking up journalists and so on.
Who should be held responsible for this?
Well, the investigation would point the direction towards who is responsible. But this report asks now for a judicial investigation. This was not a judicial investigation. You have to have a prosecutor, either Sri Lankan or together with an international prosecutor, to now investigate this and then indict those who are responsible.
UN Human Rights Commissioner has suggested for setting up of hybrid court on Sri Lankan issue. Do you think it is practically feasible?
On my visit to Sri Lanka, as I spoke to people in government and the people in the universities and so it seemed to me that there would not be support for an independent, entirely independent international panel. So while that is the call I made for an international independent panel, because of the history of lack of investigation by the former Sri Lankan government, I felt the best security is to have an independent international court set up. This, and I support the present High Commissioner's call for a hybrid court because it's important that Sri Lankans choose what they want, that Sri Lankans own this process. And, but in the view of the investigation, Sri Lankan judiciary itself is not quite ready to undertake this massive process, the judicial process. And therefore, I would encourage the current government to accept this proposal and see the value of getting international assistance, forensic expertise, for instance, to exhume graves, and to investigate the vast number of disappearances. When I was there, I think I heard of 7,000 people unaccounted for. They've just disappeared.
But the Sri Lankan government is still insisting on internal inquiry mechanism. How do you look at this?
Well, I would encourage the government of Sri Lanka to carefully weigh the proposal made by the investigation because it's fact-based, it looks at the background, and it can only be of value to Sri Lanka. What the United Nations wants to do here is to help with a vision of a united, peaceful, secure Sri Lanka where everybody could live together in peace. I would suggest that the Sri Lankan government consult the people on what kind of process they would like.
What is the difference between international inquiry and hybrid court?
A hybrid court has both international and national judges, prosecutors, and so on. One example is Sierra Leone. That's the UN supported that tribunal and they've completed their work very well. There's peace now in Sierra Leone. They can get on with building their country. The other example is Cambodia. Of course, it took 20 years. It was the government started by insisting that they will have their own national court, but eventually saw the wisdom in getting a hybrid court of internationals as well. So it's a good proven process which will advance peace and reconciliation in Sri Lanka.
But Tamil organizations and human rights organizations are still insisting that international inquiry is the only solution. How do you react for that?
I heard them too. That's why when I was High Commissioner, made the call for an independent international tribunal. So I think the opinions of people in Sri Lanka must be obtained by discussion. They have to look at all the pros and cons. No process is going to work without the cooperation of the authorities in Sri Lanka, and that's the reality.
But even after the report submitted by the 3-member experts committee, which was appointed by Mr. Ban Ki-moon, there were no effort to address the basic issues. How do you react for that?
Yes, I know that too. I know that too, that the former government did not want to see justice taking place. So we all know that. What next? One of the things that was done by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights is to produce this report, and the present High Commissioner is making a suggestion on the way forward. It's now left to the people of Sri Lanka to debate and decide what the next steps will be.
Former President Mahinda Rajapaksa says, except international inquiry, no other form of international action can control Sri Lanka. How do you react for that, ma'am?
Sri Lankan government, the former government, perhaps the current government, see this as an interference in their internal affairs, in their sovereign affairs. So from their point of view, this is a really drastic step that the UN intervened as it did.
It was American government which has brought resolution against Sri Lanka demanding international inquiry. Now, after the regime change in Sri Lanka, American government also changed its stand. Now it has come in favor of Sri Lankan government, and it is supporting the Sri Lankan government stand of internal inquiry. How do you look at this?
Countries obviously have their own agenda on these matters. Oh yes, political and economic agendas, even from countries neighboring Sri Lanka. They act in terms of their interests. Our job is to urge them to be humanitarian, to care about these terrible violations. The deaths of thousands of people cannot be ignored. So it's not just a Sri Lankan problem.
During final stages of war, there were no sincere effort to halt the war by the international community. But at the same time, there are criticism that there was a clandestine support from the international community for Sri Lankan government. Do you agree with that?
Well, I have no reason for saying so. All I know, like everybody else, we watched the final onslaught, and it was done in front of our eyes with the shelling, destroyed hospitals. People were pleading and appealing, while they were running through the sand near the estuary. So that's why I agree that these are very grave violations. People all over the world saw what was happening. At the time, I kept issuing statements calling upon big government to step in and stop the killing.
Ma'am, what is your opinion on India's role on the final stages of war? Do you think India could have stopped the killing of thousands of innocent people?
Yes, I particularly am thinking of India when I say that they could have done much more to intervene at a very early stage instead of allowing this to happen. I think there was a pause of about 2 days when the Indian elections were going on. And so we have to wonder what kind of understanding was going on between the Sri Lankan government and the Indian government at that time. So India, I think, should have taken the lead for the protection of human rights, for stopping the killing. They had influence and they could have applied pressure on the Rajapaksa government. They did not do so.
Were there any communication between India and UN during the final stages of war to stop the war?
The government of India, as well as the government of South Africa, to my great disappointment, opposed the resolution calling on Sri Lanka to investigate, establish a justice system, account for disappearances, to stop the killing. These two governments, amongst many others, said that the United Nations should not interfere in the sovereign affairs of Sri Lanka, which to me is an unacceptable position when there are grave human rights violations.
The UN Human Rights Commissioner's report, there is no mention of a word genocide. Why is it so?
The Commission did an investigation. It's not a judicial investigation. So they can't determine whether the crime of genocide could possibly have been committed, because that's a judicial decision. Judges will have to hear the evidence. Genocide has a very special requirement, and that is, has to be an intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial or religious group. That genocide was defined in 1948. I would agree with many people that that genocide convention has to be revisited and brought up to date in view of current conflicts that we face. But as we stand now, that is the crime of genocide. That's probably why the Commission couldn't go so far. Only evidence in a court of law pointing to theft will establish whether genocide was committed.
Can we believe the commitment or rather assurance by the Sri Lankan government on the internal inquiry?
Well, let me speak my point of view. When I visited Sri Lanka, I raised the question of harassment and sexual abuse of women, particularly North, by members of the military. And I raised it and said, firstly, it has to stop. Secondly, the culprits have to be brought to justice. And I noticed that it had not been investigated. So I see it as a very important issue that this investigation has addressed.
There is a criticism from Tamil and other human rights organizations that America and other countries are trying to dilute the resolution against Sri Lanka. Do you agree with that, ma'am?
Yes, I agree. You know, these resolutions always come up after compromise to get enough votes to support. So I agree with the people whom you're referring to. They are ready to ask for proper accountability and not a diluted system.
Do you think the countries acted for their own interest rather than the Sri Lanka's core issue?
Let me remind you again. The member states of the United Nations did not. They declined to address and have even a debate or discussion on what was happening in Sri Lanka while it was happening and even after. So by then I mean the Security Council, the General Assembly, and the Human Rights Council itself. So we have to pay some credit to the initiative taken by the Obama administration, who threw their weight in behind the call for an investigation and accountability. So if it hadn't been for them lobbying various governments, we wouldn't even have had this resolution, which I agree all Sri Lankan is weak anyway. But the best we got is what we have now, and that we got because of pressure from the U.S. government, who supports the principle of justice and accountability. So I would say it's very, very important that civil society, all Sri Lankans and the diaspora and international NGOs maintain their very strong call for an internationally accepted high-level investigation, properly funded and properly investigated. So I also support that call. As I see, the reality is we've advanced only to this point. And there's no way the United Nations can force the Sri Lankan government to carry out the will of the United Nations.
Ma'am, how do you see the role of India in getting the equal rights for Sri Lankan Tamils?
The government of India has in the past intervened at various points. They are the nearest neighbors. It's a powerful country. It's a democratic country. It's very important that they play a greater role to help all Sri Lankans to rebuild their country and have a final end to conflict and violence there. I believe that the Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu also made a call for an international independent court to be set up. And I think that such a call from the state of Tamil Nadu should be taken up by the national government.
What should be the immediate step for getting equal rights for Tamils?
I would encourage the government of India to override their political and economic interests and rather secure human rights, because India is a democracy. The people of India believe the protection, promotion of human rights all over the world. I've heard massive demands from Indian people asking for these protections. So that should be prioritized over and above their geopolitical interests. What
should be the final shape of the resolution on Sri Lanka?
The current High Commissioner has called for a hybrid tribunal because he sees the reality that you can't do anything without the cooperation of the Sri Lankan government. So I understand why he made that call. I am on record for demanding international independent tribunal because I worked as an international judge and know that you need the assistance of the international community in terms of resources, expertise, and independent individuals as well. So that is my call. I stay with that, but I have said again and again, you can't have anything done without the cooperation of the government of Sri Lanka.
புதிய தலைமுறை நேயர்களுக்காக இலங்கை தொடர்பான பல்வேறு கருத்துக்களை பகிர்ந்து கொண்டீர்கள். நவநீதம் பிள்ளை அவர்களே, மிக்க நன்றி.
Thank you. நன்றி.